this is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 36 of The Grief of Politics. I'm joined once again by Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing?
Good morning, sir. Doing good.
Yeah, we were both trying. You were messing with your setup. I had to mess with my setup. I'm trying to find a nice, cozy way to do the pod. I have a literal pod of, of the canvas around me. And
you set up a pod for your pod?
I set up a pod for the pod. I'm trying to, no stone unturned. This month, we were going to talk about libertarianism because we have mentioned it several times. And I remember when I told you that I wanted to talk about this isn't like one of those things where, we don't really destroy each other, debate that much. We talk about the issues. But this is something that I didn't really understand that much about. And so this whole episode is more of like, hey, Avin, you consider yourself more conservative or libertarian than, say, me. So pitch me the idea of being a libertarian and why I should care. You sent 5 articles, not 3, which is fine, but that was a lot.
I sent 4.
4. One was like from the official website, I think. I got the Cato.org, 2 articles from The Hill.
And 1 from the Washington Post.
Yeah, and then you just linked the Libertarian.org website of like their beliefs. So 4 articles and like 1 website basically to look at. So
I did more. Specifically, I wanted to bring in the Libertarian Party website because like the Libertarian Party is going to describe themselves better than anyone. Cato Institute is essentially a libertarian organization. Anyway, like a libertarian think tank.
Yep.
But the basic concept of libertarianism as it was pitched to me when I was very young, and I think they themselves kind of mirror this at a very high level view. It's social liberalism, fiscal conservatism. We're careful with our money. We believe in small government, as small as possible without being anarchist, because we're not Penn Jillette. And social liberalism, basically, let me live my life the way I want to live my life. Let me keep as much of my money as possible and use the money I give you to keep society functioning, not for pet projects. So I thought that was a great but it's a good summary of it. I don't know, from what you read, is that your takeaway? Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, the lp.org that I wrote down, that was the one that I went through, like the, their tenets, like everything you just kind of laid out. The one thing I do like is there was a whole thing about how we shouldn't spy on people. That was like in their charter, basically, because I clicked on that.
It's in their platform.
Yeah, like I didn't just look at the homepage just to have I actually did click into the Libertarian and like read.
Good job,
I think
Joe.
I know how to read. I think that charter was in '74, if I remember right, and like they had a lot of like things laid out. Like this was laid out at this charter, and we shouldn't spy on people and stuff.
So their platform has changed over time, right? If you're on the lp.org website, they have their full platform laid out. Mind you, it's not perfect, but it's lp.org/platform. And I kind of just wanted to read the preamble because I think that'll give a good idea. So, preamble. As libertarians, we seek a world of liberty, a world in which all individuals are sovereign over their own lives and are not forced to sacrifice their values for the benefits of others. We believe that respect for individual rights is the essential precondition for a free and prosperous world, that force and fraud must be banished from human relationships, and that only through freedom can peace and prosperity be realized. Consequently, we defend each person's rights to engage in any activity that is peaceful and honest, and welcome the diversity that freedom brings. The world we seek to build is one where individuals are free to follow their own dreams in their own ways, without interference from the government or any authoritarian power. In the following pages, we set forth our basic principles and enumerate various policy stands derived from those principles. These specific policies are not our goal, however. Our goal is nothing more nor less than a world set free in our lifetime, and it is to this end that we take these stands. So, essentially, social liberalism, fiscal conservatism, in that, tax the least amount you necessarily have to keep society running and smooth, right? And they do acknowledge we do need rules and laws. We don't want fraud. You don't just get rid of that by saying no more fraud. We don't want deception in our society. We have to have that. I know a lot of people describe libertarians as kooks who want to get rid of every government organization. And there are those that do. Right. I even saw an article of the new, was it the Argentinian president that's pretty populist, and they're calling him, or maybe it was Venezuela.
Yeah, I don't.
Some South American guy whose name is escaping me at the moment. It's been in the news a lot lately because he's doing things like getting rid of their version of the Fed, and like they're like the libertarian president and so, and I'm like, it goes further than that, right? But also the idea of like, stop interfering with my life. Like, I know how to live my life best.
Yeah, no, I don't think by themselves, you know, or like the libertarian organization is kooks, but usually is what is presented on, well, mostly CNN and things like that, is the people you're talking about of like, we don't need government for anything, you know.
Which is anarchist. It's not libertarianism. It's anarchy.
I do want to bring up the other, I want to see if I can find this. I do like the fact that they talk about the environment. You know, they said competitive free. This is like from their platform page or whatever, and it talks about
under economic liberty, which is bullet point 2 in their platform, environment.
Yeah, it's 2.2. I like this. It says competitive free markets and property rights stimulate the technological innovations and behavioral changes required to protect our environment and ecosystems. Private landowners and conservation groups have a vested interest in maintaining natural resources. Governments are unaccountable for damage done to our environment and have a terrible track record when it comes to environmental protection. Protecting the environment requires a clear definition and an enforcement of individual rights and responsibilities regarding resources like land, water, air, and wildlife. Where damages can be proven and qualified in court, restitution to the injured parties must be required. Some of this I like, some of it I think is, I think we've seen just through history in general that like you said, they don't want to get rid of all government. We do realize there's a need because some people don't, you know, look at these things. In fact, if you look at like environmental stuff through private rights, like there's been a lot of talk in like the Pennsylvania area where companies will come in and buy up land from private individuals and then use that land however they want. And those people will end up regretting selling it to, you know, somebody drilling for natural gas or oil. And I think my thing is like, that's an interesting quandary for libertarians. Like, what do? It's their private property. They decided to sell it to a corporation, but that corporation is, you know, they're not technically, well, they are infringing, but it's like, well, you sold over your ownership of this land. So like, what happens then? I mean, there's been people that have written books about it that have gone there and interviewed people, and it's, you know, dyed in the wool, either libertarians or conservatives that end up saying, I've made a horrible mistake. This isn't really what I thought of my property rights and all that, you know, like it's one of those things.
You sold the property, right? There's not much you can do about it, unfortunately. I mean, you could negotiate the contract, and so the company couldn't do certain things, right? You can sell, not sell the mineral rights. You can not sell the air rights. Like, right. There's ways you can structure contracts to do that. But once you've sold it, it's out of your hand. And seller's remorse, like buyer's remorse, like unless we create a legal system and a legal structure that would protect that, like our current legal structure doesn't protect that. There's nothing we can do unless the law says no.
I think they did say in here, like, well, they said at the end of the environmental one that, 2.2.
To the extent possible, we advocate for all public services be funded or allowed. Oh no, I'm reading. Wow, I'm way off.
I was like, well, yeah, it says where damages can be proved and qualified in a court of law, restitution to the injured party. So it's like, you know, like this guy sold his land, but you've contaminated the groundwater, you know, and whatever for doing so. Like, he has the right to sell that land to you, but you don't have the right to contaminate drinking water or whatever for the town or have you, or,
right?
You know.
And that's a different situation altogether, right? Like, yeah, you can do whatever you want on the land, but if what you're doing on that land harms the people around you, they have every right to come after you.
Right. I thought, too, was interesting, the two articles you sent I want to say both of them were from The Hill, about one was from the Washington Post and the other one was from The Hill about, well, let's just start what I found. The first one I clicked on, which I think the first one you sent, was from the Cato.org, which they mentioned in other articles referencing back to who started Cato. And the whole argument, I took notes. The one thing, by the way, this is from Cato.org. This article came out August 25th, 2017 at 9:40 p.m. if you care. It was written by, did it say he was? Oh, David Boaz.
David Boaz.
Yeah, Boaz. I thought just the name of the article was interesting. It's called Libertarianism, Individualism, and Racism. And I know this article and the later one in the Washington Post talks about there's this weird tension with libertarians and like personal freedom and like, if I can't be compelled for desegregation. Like if I want things segregated, that's my personal right. But then some people in the movement have said no. And this Cato thing really talks about it. Like I'm trying to find.
I mean, right off the beginning, the very first paragraph that's quoted, the author of the article adds.
Yeah,
go ahead. Okay.
Well, it says Nick Gillespie, who wrote something else that's going to get mentioned. I didn't write that down, but he said the alt-right and Trumpism, quote, the alt-right, this is from Nick Gillespie, quote, the alt-right and Trumpism, too, to the extent that it is any coherence, is an explicit rejection of foundational libertarian beliefs in free trade and free migration, along with experiments in living that make a mess of rigid categories that appeal to racist, sexist, protectionists, and other reactionaries, and add to my own commentary excerpt from my book. And then this gets into this. David Boaz, I think, wrote this. He wrote the book 2015, The Libertarian Mind. The dignity of the individual under libertarian is a dignity that enhances social well-being. Libertarianism is good not just for individuals, but for societies. The positive basis of libertarian social analysis is methodological. Yeah, individualism, the recognition that only individuals act. The ethic and normative basis of libertarianism is respect of the dignity and worth of every other individual. This is expressed in the philosopher Immanuel Kant's dictum that each person is to be treated not merely as a means, but as an ends to himself, which I thought was really good. I got another quote later, but yeah, I mean, to me, that's like, we have to treat everybody really it comes back to like the golden rule, like treat everybody as you want to be treated. You don't want. Right.
Which comes back to one of the other things, right? Describing the super high level view of libertarian, social, liberal, fiscal, conservative, but coming back to the point of the focus on the preeminence of the individual, which has been a staple of the United States our entire existence, right? The individual is supreme over the government, over everybody else. The Libertarian Party just focuses on that more heavily than anything else.
But yeah, like later we'll come. I thought this was interesting. This was from the third paragraph of that Canto.org. It says,
Cato.
Yeah, Cato. I'll read the whole thing. American struggle against specific injuries suffered by the colonies. The feminist and abolitionist Agelina Grimmock noted in an 1837 letter to Catherine E. Beecher, I have found the anti-slavery cause to be the high school of morals in our land, the school in which human rights are more fully invested and better understood and taught than in any other. And I do think it's this interesting thing of like, we need to lift everybody up. But then I think we're going to bring in later, there is an idea of, this is right here. And I just want to read from this because it's kind of like blew me away. I'll read the whole thing. I had just a couple of these. Right here. I just want to read this whole thing. I had just an excerpt, but it would make more sense if I read the whole thing, so bear with me. The abolitionist movement grew logically out of the Lockean libertarianism of the American Revolution. How could Americans proclaim that, quote, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, unquote, without noticing that they themselves were holding other men and women in bondage? They could not, of course, and had they tried, they would have been reminded by people such as the great English philosopher Samuel Johnson, who wrote in 1775, quote, how is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? Unquote. The world's first anti-slavery society was founded in Philadelphia the same year. Jefferson himself owned slaves, yet he included a passionate condemnation of slavery in his draft of the Declaration of Independence. Quote, in brackets, King George, unbracket, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violated its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the person of a distant people who never offended him. The Continental Congress deleted the passage, but Americans lived uneasily with the obvious contradiction between their commitment to individual rights and the institution of slavery. Now, I tried to look into the Continental Congress. I don't know if I couldn't find it. I don't know why they took that passage out. That seems like that would be pretty important for a party to talk about liberty and keep that in. So maybe I missed something. Did you find anything, or did that jump out at you? Or?
I didn't dig into the history on that. My speculation would be is that it was taken out to appease other parties that were part of the Continental Congress, because they were
owning slaves. So you're like, hey, we're starting this thing. You have slaves
because they need the money, right? So it's that moral quandary of like, we need to push forward our initiative. And at that time, right, it was the freedom of the United States of America and independence of the United States of America. Right. We need to push that forward. Are we willing to keep the blood on our hands, so to speak, of bringing in these people who are going to keep owning slaves, even though we disagree with it?
And then that obviously boiled over into the Civil War and all that kind of stuff later, and the Emancipation.
Because it wasn't dealt with in the beginning when it should have been.
I heard some anecdote, which I don't think to be far-fetched, is that Lincoln supposedly wrote the Emancipation and then kept it in a drawer for a while. And I've read different accounts of him. You know, I don't know Lincoln's internal monologue. I've heard stuff on the left and the right of that Lincoln is racist, Lincoln isn't racist, all that kind of stuff. But the idea that he was grappling with the country being torn apart, and like, I've written this thing, when do I release it, stuff like that, you know, like, so I think a lot of people were grappling with that, you know, so I think some of it was just, I don't know, I found that very interesting in the article, because that is interesting, where it's like, hey, how come you people own people and you're calling for liberty, you know, like, and Dave Chappelle even made a joke years ago, you know, of like, how do I finish this? You know, whatever. He made a joke of Jefferson having slaves, basically. So that really jumped out to me, that passage there, even though I do like this idea of, I mean, we'll talk about it later with other articles, but this idea of, you know, we need to uplift people. We can't have slavery, but then later people talk about like, oh, I don't care about these other groups of people and stuff, you know? And so I don't know, it creates this uneasy tension. Did anything, when you were reading that or whatever, did anything jump out at you when you were, you know, that Cato.org piece? Not
really. Everything about it completely makes sense. I really did appreciate that there's sort of an overt pushback on racism within the Libertarian Foundation, period. Especially because currently, right, like, we're hearing more about, like, libertarians are becoming racist and are racist and being taken over by racists, which is why I specifically went after the Washington Post article that basically brings that up. Libertarians have more in common.
Yeah, I do want to get to that. I want to do this. I can't believe I agreed with Ayn Rand reading this piece, but
which in this Cato Institute article we come down to that.
That's like the last
Ayn Rand
or the
statement and what it says, right? And what Ayn Rand says on. So as Ayn Rand pointed out in her 1963 essay, Racism. She wrote, "Racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. It is the notion of ascribing moral, social, or political significance to a man's genetic lineage, which means, in practice, that a man is to be judged not by his own character and actions, but by the character and actions of a collective of ancestors."
Which she's right, but she is also, I don't know when this was published, but she has gotten in front of like Senate committees and
63.
Well, she's later said stuff about Native Americans that kind of like are the inverse of this. So maybe that was early on and this was later. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Ayn Rand. But the idea that she basically said, oh, yeah, you're judging people by their collective race and not the individual person. But then she basically said in a Senate thing like, well, it's kind of good that we did something useful with the land. They weren't doing anything with it, so they obviously don't deserve it.
Again, though, Ayn Rand and her value system. I mean, the next sentence in here is from the book, from Boaz, from his 2015 book.
Yeah.
So most of this article is quoting from his book. So the next sentence after her quote from her essay is, in her works, Rand emphasized the importance of individual productive achievement to a sense of efficacy and happiness. So I not knowing those interviews, but from what you just said, my suspicion would be is basically she was like, look, like, I got nothing against the Native Americans, but they weren't using the land in a productive way, and we use the land in a productive way, and that's the best thing.
But the problem with that is that's like what is productive and like you know what I mean? It's like there's no industry. Whatever in the colonies are, before it's like, do they,
she's just replacing racism with a measure like, well, they don't have value because they weren't using the land. And I don't think it was necessarily because they're Native American. She probably could care less about it. She would probably look down on any society. Aborigines, when we went into Australia, weren't using the land in a way that she measured as productive. And so I'm not saying that it absolves her from that.
No, I'm not saying either. I just think
forgetting of their individual liberty, because she's conveniently forgetting of the individual liberty of the Native Americans to take their land and use it in ways she says is productive.
They had art and culture, and they hunted, and all to them their society was working in a way. Like there was things happening.
Right.
That's like somebody said that years ago. They went to it was like a relative. They went to Mexico, and they go, man, I don't. This whole town is screwed up. Maybe someone needs to learn how to run this government. I'm like, you could say that anywhere. Like, you could say that anywhere. You go to.
It just depends on what your particular moral yardstick is for what's screwed up and what's not.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I do think her premise of you have to look at, what like people's individual, like what they're adding to whatever being productive or their individual worth, not look at them and go, well, that person's lazy. Right. So they're all lazy. You can't really do that.
She doesn't say it directly, but basically she's saying that we should be judging people based on their character and actions. Right. Because in the last sentence in here, which means in practice that a man is not to be judged not by his own character and actions, which is what she's saying is what should be done in this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, that was good. I don't know what article you want to go to next. I mean, unless you have any, because like that's the end of that one, basically. Do you want to go to the Hill one or the Post one, maybe, or I don't know which one.
I mean, whichever one that you'd like to go to on this, right? Like this is sort of you wanting to understand libertarians a little bit more. I learned a lot, right? Like I hadn't realized that the Libertarian Party was kind of absorbing a lot of these alt-right conservatives.
Yeah, it seems like no matter your political affiliation, there's always one person that kind of ruins it for everybody. Like the libertarians had this, like, this is what we believe, individual freedom, liberty, all that kind of stuff. And then, I mean, we'll quote it later, but somebody basically comes up and goes, oh yeah, like I shouldn't be forced to desegregate. And we're like, whoa, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what, like, and then that guy, whatever. I'll go to the Hill article. It's called 5 Things the Libertarian Party Stands For. It's by Ben Cashmere. It came out on May 27, 2016. 6:07 a.m. It basically talks about Mark Q.
In case anyone's looking.
Oh yeah.
Or Commissar, Kamisar. If anyone wants to read the article.
Yeah. But I just like it because it talked about, like basically what we talked about before: individual freedom, social liberals, economic conservatives. But I do like this section on abortion. Because it basically said, despite the social liberal bent, this is the issue that like libertarians disagree. That in 2014, the platform echoed an effective pro-abortion rights position, arguing that government should be kept out of the matter, leaving the question of each person for their conscientious consideration. But this year, a potential contentious change recommended by the party's platform committee included a complete retool of the platform, shifting the rhetoric back towards the center. If adopted, the plank will declare the Libertarians' belief that taxpayers should not be forced to pay for other people's abortions. Because it's an individual thing, right? So,
and again, that's just libertarian at its core, right? Is like, my tax dollar shouldn't be used to do anything for anyone else that I might disagree with, which gets really, really complicated in a government and a society of our size.
Yeah, it does, because you have to decide what the cutoff is, right? You have to say, like, okay, we're not going to pay for this, but we'll pay for this. Well, then, like a road, everybody drives on a road, so that's a common good, right? That we all have agreed.
But except for what about those people that don't drive on the road? Right.
But then, it's like, well, what? But that's like each individual thing of like, where's the cutoff? And I think that's the problem with the difficulty I see in doing something that's completely libertarian is the idea of what's the cutoff line, like where because I would argue that, and again, I'm a liberal hippie, we went over this a lot, but sometimes I pay for things in the collective good because I think we could all benefit from it. So even though it's not me individually being affected by something, I agree that you having a better quality of life or somebody else having a better quality of life affects my quality of life, so like there's this kind of like as Ayn Rand would say, some collectivism to it, of the idea that, like, hey, I understand this is your liberty and my liberty, but I think if I pay for this, we can both bear their fruits.
And the reality of it is, right, like, these are the viewpoints of the Libertarian Party. And we're going to keep going through these articles and keep talking about it, so this isn't like a summation and we're done. But, I mean, the reality of it is we have a representative Republican government, not Republican as in Republicans, but Republican as in a republic. We are represented in our government by many different viewpoints and many different ideas, and one particular ideal doesn't actually ever take preeminence because it's always adjusted, watered down, compromised. We'll give this, take that, right?
Right.
And so no overarching libertarian ideal would ever particularly take place unless society as a whole moved to that. And good frickin' luck, we're not ever going to do that. We're not going to ever move all left. We're not ever going to move all right unless we have another horrible civil war and develop a totalitarian government. Yeah. And I think that's important to point out because we have a lot of rhetoric right now. In fact, I read an article this week, and I can't tell you what the article was, but the summation of the article was, I can tell you one thing with certainty. After the election next year, one side is going to think that the society that we live in is over. Because that's the rhetoric that we have right now. Both sides are basically, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, right? Both sides are currently spreading this narrative that if the other side wins, you're going to go to prison forever for your beliefs, and your kids are going to be taken to indoctrination camps and taught that you're evil and the devil, and to believe with religious fervence the viewpoint of whatever side wins. And that's just not what's going to happen. It's not how our society functions. We have checks and balances for a purpose. The disgusting thing about it to me is that we are societally falling into that and forgetting that we have checks and balances.
We do,
it's
but
not that bad.
I mean, on one side, you do have someone that is, a lot of people have rung the alarm, even people on the right, of like, hey, we have guardrails now, but some of those guardrails are being removed, or they've been trying to be worked around. So this process that we have,
both sides are saying the same thing, is my point, Joe. Conservatives are saying those guardrails are being taken away and you're stealing my rights. And liberals are saying those guardrails are being taken away and you're stealing our rights. Right? It's happening on both sides. And that is the rhetoric. The ability to manipulate people that are afraid is so much higher. And both parties are playing Americans like fiddles.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of
I need an easier instrument because it's even easier than a fiddle, right? Like, we're getting played so hard as a society by both parties that I don't have words to express it. It is sad.
Well, I mean, after 2020 and January 6th, I mean, when we started the pod, to me, no matter if you say what that was, everybody was paying attention to it, and that marks a big difference in the way we look at politics now. So before it was people yelling on the left and the right, but after January 6th, it's like, now we need to pay attention. You know what I mean? Like, what Trump happened didn't happen. Luckily, that's going through the court system right now. We'll find out how that goes. But like, I think people that weren't paying attention are now paying attention to, like, this isn't some abstract thing anymore of like me yelling at you because you believe in abortion rights, or you yelling at me because I don't believe in whatever the thing is. This is like,
it is much more front and center than it has been before, right? There's a deeper reality to that threat of one party coming in and taking it, right? Like, yeah, we'll getting derailed on that, but you brought up last night when you and I were having a conversation about how Trump did an interview recently with Sean Hannity, where basically he said he was going to weaponize the government for day one, not after day one, but for day one, I'm going to go after my political enemies.
Yeah. Well, he even talked
that's not how our government works. We are not a government of going after our political enemies. It doesn't matter who you are or what you believe. The problem is,
there was
too many people are apologetic for him, and they relate to, they ascribe their victimhood to his victimhood.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, it wasn't just liberals that he was going to go after. He mentioned Bill Barr and, you know, in other interviews of like all these people, you know, basically
his political enemies. I didn't say liberals, his political enemies.
Yeah, so it was like the grievance.
He'd go after Liz Cheney. He'd probably go after Mark Meadows. He'd
probably Adam Kissinger.
Hang Cohen in the streets.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a cat that's like very interested in what I'm doing right now, and he's like, "What are you recording?" He's like looking at my stuff. I think the other, I mean, I think the last two we have to get into is the first one in the Hill of why the
Libertarian Party is collapsing. Here's why.
Yeah.
This article was Andrew Koppelman. It's an opinion contributor, and it was written or published on the 9th of October in 2022.
Right, yeah.
The Libertarian Party is collapsing. Here's why is the actual title of it.
Yeah. And then I wrote, I was kind of amazing that he brought up racism again, just in the first.
The reason for that is I actually specifically wanted to bring that up because when you and I had been talking and you were talking about it, you had talked about, you know, what about these things that libertarians are saying that were like racist or far alt-right. So I specifically looked it up because I wanted to see like what people are saying and what they think.
What did you think reading the article? I mean, was I being hyperbolic? And I'm okay with being hyperbolic sometimes, Avin. Did you think I was blowing it out of proportion? Because these people are bringing it up too. Like, hey, they said some stuff that isn't great, you know? Like,
well, and they've talked about like the Libertarian Party kind of starting to be co-opted, like people coming in that are ascribing themselves as libertarian, that are moving in and taking positions. And some alt-right viewpoints line up. A lot of the fiscal conservative viewpoints and small government viewpoints line up with other aspects of the alt-right. The problem is the social liberalism doesn't.
Right.
And so they don't really line up. And I think the takeaway from here is that like these people that are kind of taking positions within Libertarian Party are not really truly libertarians. And one of the biggest problems the Libertarian Party has always had is because it's a party of individual freedom and individual rights, it's been jokingly described as herding cats.
Right.
Everyone wants to do their own thing.
Right. Well, the one thing I did want to call out was I was kind of blown away with one of the first things that jumped out at this article was, it says, as a result, the party is facing mass defections, and they're talking about, right here. I'll read the two paragraphs back to back. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day this year, so what was it, 2022? 2022.
2022, yeah.
The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire tweeted in a later deleted post that America isn't in debt to black people, or, quote, America isn't in debt to black people. If anything, it's the other way around, unquote. Caucus members have called for violent repression of Antifa and Black Lives Matter protesters. The new leadership first and most prominent decision was to was to remove from party platform language declaring we condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant. And this is what I find interesting because Gary Johnson kind of had a moment in the sun. As a result, the party is facing mass defections. In 2016, Gary Johnson was the most successful libertarian presidential candidate in history. I didn't know this, and this is why I want to call this out. He got almost 4.5 million votes, 3.3% of the votes cast, 3 times more than any other previous libertarian candidate, including Johnson himself in 2012. And I think as a side conversation, I don't know if we've ever talked about third parties in...
it's worth discussing.
Yeah. I'm going to write that down as a note. But I remember feeling this like, no, it is plausible, if you do have somebody that... has a good message, you can actually make a change. And I thought that was interesting. And the other thing I wanted to call out, I just want to say that is like a historical side, which I didn't know he did so well or polled so well. But the other thing I had written on here was, it's from the next paragraph. And then what did I, it says right here, the insurgents are funded by donors who have been close to former President Trump, suggesting that the takeover is part of a coordinated Republican strategy to destroy the party that has been draining away Republican votes. If Trump has gotten every Libertarian vote in 2020, he would have won. The chairman of the New Mexico Libertarian Party wrote that the leadership has adopted messaging and communications hostile to the principles for which the Libertarian Party was founded, serving no purpose other than to antagonize and embarrass, unquote. That may indeed be the purpose. And then what I thought was interesting about that was we've kind of seen this recently with RFK Jr., where when he was running as a Democrat, the people on the right made fun of him, like Fox News was making fun of him, and they were kind of happy because he was going to pull votes away from Biden, but then he decided to run as an independent, and they probably had some internal polling, and I've read online, to show that would pull more votes away from Trump. And so then RFK Jr. did an interview with Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity went after him, like, well, you're pretty liberal and all this stuff in the interview. And so you see this idea of, like, libertarians seem to be more of an attack on conservatives than they do liberals. And so, Trump could have won, obviously, like this person said, probably would have won in 2020 if it wasn't for those darn libertarians, So, yeah, I mean...
And that's been the argument for a long time, right? The reality of it is, though, is that not every libertarian would have voted for Trump, right? Libertarians are a mix of liberal and conservative. They are, gays can get married. Who cares? Drugs shouldn't be illegal. I mean, mind you, I'm ascribing broad beliefs, not full, but, like, drugs shouldn't be illegal. People should be allowed to smoke marijuana if they want to smoke marijuana. People should be able to marry whoever they want to marry. The government shouldn't regulate that. Yeah. If you want to change your gender and change your name, you should be allowed to do that. It's not government's responsibility to dictate, as long as you aren't harming the collective or other people's ability to live their life as they see fit. And so you poll, and they've done research on it, the Libertarian Party tends to poll about 50-50 from both sides. So, if conservatives want to, Republicans specifically want to try to undermine libertarians, then fine, but they're not going to get the result they think they're going to get out of it.
Yeah, it just seems like one of these things where it's like everything... I do find it funny that conservatives do use liberty and freedom a lot, usually in their talking points, but then they're doing things like, hey, no matter what I think about the books they're banning, just the optics of a book ban kind of looks bad, like the only other historical thing we have for book bans is like Nazi Germany, the Beatle records got burned, like stuff of like culture stuff, and so it's like, and then also, personal freedom and all this stuff, but like gay marriage is bad for some people. I know they have the new Speaker of the House is very conservative, Mike Johnson, and he's spoken about that stuff before, about how it's evil, and so it's like, yeah.
And you've got the flip side of that, George Santos, who was literally just expelled from Congress because of his extremely questionable morals.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, flat out lying. I mean, we haven't proven it yet, right? He hasn't been convicted of anything. Everyone's kind of up in arms that they kicked him out without any convictions. But, like, the track record is so bad. The look is so bad. His own words are so condemning that they kicked him out. But he was elected as a conservative gay man.
Yeah. And then also apparently he spoke out against gay marriage, but he's a gay man, so that's weird. It just seems like he's literally, I don't know. His brain is hurting cats, I think is what it's not just like, you know what I mean? Like it's yeah. One thing I did think was interesting about the last thing about this Hill article, it says right here, it's this whole paragraph. I had like an individual quote, but I think it ends. Libertarianism offers a peculiar vision of the heroic solitary individual who sustains himself without any external support. It says, quote, I don't depend on anybody. I can take care of myself, unquote. This fantasy of autarky, which I had to look up, which is like financial independence, can also involve the capacity to separate from people one doesn't like. It denies any obligation to them that might be based either on shared membership in a community or on a history of wrongs that one has involuntary benefited from. The fantasy is easy to swallow if it means that one gets to keep more of what one has. Here, as every elsewhere in libertarian thought, there is an active partnership between delusion and greed. So that's kind of a rough way to end the article, I think. But you definitely tell that Koppelman's coming down on a side of libertarianism. But I think the Washington Post article goes into this idea more. You know, the idea that, I haven't opened it yet, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that's a pretty rough way to end your thoughts on his thoughts on libertarianism, I think.
I mean, yeah, he closed it out pretty brutally, right? And he's specifically talking about kind of how the party's falling apart. And so it's a kind of a harsh way to conclude that.
What do you do you think that do you think he's out of line, or do you think that he
I mean, it's the direction that the party's moving. I don't blame him. And maybe he's lamenting the viewpoint. I mean, The Hill tends to be a pretty libertarian publication too. They lean more conservative. Right. And so I haven't read the article in a couple days because I read this on Thursday. So I don't remember the specifics, and I probably should take notes like you take on it. But
I had time last night because I wasn't feeling well. I was like, well, I should read these for tomorrow. So,
I feel like it's more of a lament, right? And he's not wrong, right? Like the principles of alt-right movements are antithetical to the basic tenets of libertarianism.
Right. Well, I think to end it, I'm kind of glad we did end it on this Washington Post article, or this is the last article we're talking about, because this one really dives into like what people have said about it's from the Washington Post. It's called "Libertarians Have More in Common with the Alt-Right Than They Want You to Think." It was from John Gaines. It came out on September 19th, 2017. It's 6 a.m. EDT, which I think is Eastern time. And then for my notes, Avin, I did read this thing, and I was like, what about this paragraph and this paragraph? And I'm like writing up. And then I just wrote in parentheses, I said, whole thing is a bummer. That's what I wrote from my notes. This whole thing is a bummer. It's crazy to me. This is the second paragraph. Members of the non-mainstream right were quick to distance themselves from the alt-right, which is a small far-right movement that seeks a white-only state. Taylor Millard, writing on Hot Air, heaped abuse on the alt-right, calling them, quote, grifters and, quote, fakers, and calling on his fellow conservatives and libertarians to decisively purge the alt-right from their ranks. Nick Gillespie, who was mentioned in the Cato.org article, an editor of the libertarian magazine Reason, denied that there is any pipeline between libertarianism and the alt-right, arguing that real liberty-loving libertarians reject the collectivism and authoritarianism of the alt-right. Michael Brennan Doherty, writing in the National Review, similarly asserted that there's not much to the whole idea of a libertarian to fascist pipeline, that fringes will be fringes, and that kooks will always congregate there. Oh, kooks was in quotes. It's probably true that some of the overlap between libertarians and alt-righters can be explained with their companionship as members of the political fringe, But it's not purely accidental either. Historically, prominent libertarian thinkers have made the decision to cultivate ties with the nationalist far right and have viewed racial demagoguery both as an officious political tool and an intellectual defensible position. The libertarian to fascist pipeline may have been forged partially by coincidence, but it is also crafted and maintained. And then they start going into like the John Birch Society, Joseph McCarthy, like, you know, these people like all kind of looked at this like, you know, oh, right here it says, this part was strange to me. It says, everybody knows of Ron Paul. I kind of like Ron Paul. He had some good takes, but I didn't know about this. This guy named Rothbard wanted to put some more emotional meat on the spare abstract bones of libertarian economics. Rockwell, who shared Rothbard's strategy, penned a series of virulent, racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic newsletters on behalf of Ron Paul. So that part confused me. Like, was Ron Paul allowing this guy to write newsletters for him or something? Or did that make sense to you? It just seemed weird that maybe Ron Paul was like, yeah, go write my newsletter. I don't care. And then woke up one Monday morning or whatever and was like, oh, my word. You know, like this, I can't believe he said all this stuff. Like,
I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, because like I didn't know any of this. And to me, I am astounded that it hasn't been brought up and thrown in Ron Paul's face more. Because, I mean, Ron Paul only got out of politics about 10 years ago. I don't remember when his last year in Congress or Senate was.
I thought he passed away recently. Am I way wrong? Is he alive? I thought Ron Paul passed away.
He passed away a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because he did have he's had some good takes and things like that. But this, I was like, whoa, man, you know? And, yeah. And then it says the full articulation of Rothbard's strategy. This is the next.
Oh, no, he's still alive.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, and he was in office until 2012. The end of January 3rd, 2013 was his last day in office.
So now he's retired, yeah. But anyway, the full articulation of Rothbard's strategy and a piece of political cynicism for the Rothbard cynicism for the ages appeared in his 1992 essay "Right-Wing Populism," and an apologia for the former Ku Klux Klan grandee David Duke's failed presidential run. Rothbard found much to like in Duke's position: lower taxes, dismantling the bureaucracy, slashing the welfare state, attacking affirmative action, and racial set-asides, calling for equal rights for all Americans, including whites. What's wrong with anything about that? Any of that? So it does seem like it could be a slippery slope for some of these people that are high-minded writing about these things, you know, that it's definitely something where you're like, you know, like maybe not.
Correct. And I'm not going to say that that's wrong, right? But we're also going back quite a ways to look at it. But then we're drawing it back in, too. As I was saying earlier, right? Like, it makes sense that people coming from the alt-right would want to move that way because, you know, libertarians a little bit more hard-lined about fiscal conservancy and a little bit more hard line on small government than Republicans are. In fact, right, like the last several Republican presidents have grown GDP and have grown government, not GDP, but like debt and agencies and organizations, and we've spent more money and we've been more interventionalists, and a lot of the far right is less interventionalism, smaller government, lower taxes, and so they're going to relate to that part of it. The problem is the Libertarian Party, despite the fact that it is in their tenet for individual liberty and freedom and social liberalism, right? Like their stance on abortion, even coming closer to the center, which may alienate some people, is still like, look, I don't care if you get an abortion, but
I don't want to pay for it.
Just don't make me pay for it.
Right. Well, so I said this whole thing,
and the alt-right would be vehemently against that.
Right. Well, this brings me to this paragraph, which, like I said, I did read this and took notes, but like I said, the whole thing is a bummer. But this paragraph also jumped out at me. It was a bareness It was the very bareness of the idea of self-interest and liberty as such that allowed Chris Cantwell, the weeping neo-Nazi made infamous in Vice's coverage of Charlottesville, and an avid reader of Hope and Rothbard, to make conceptual space for racism. Quote, people should be free to exercise complete control over their own person and property. If blacks are committing crimes or Jews are spreading communism, discriminating against them is the right of any property owner, unquote. So, and then it says next, it's a quick step from here to full-on white nationalism, which interprets history and politics as a story of different races pursuing their collective self-interest. It should come as a great surprise that enshrining self-interest as the core of morality would lead to a cynical worldview that takes all action to be struggle or manipulation. The, quote, liberty of libertarianism is merely negative, and a mind guided with the mere concept of its own interest can be led to anything or to nothing. For this reason, the intellectual wasteland of libertarianism continues to provide a safe space for fascists. Its simple philosophy, or its simple has philosophical room for them, and no particular injunctions to turn them away. And yeah, man, that's the end of the article. So again, another dour read.
Except I would vehemently disagree with him on that last sentence, right? Like, any fascist who identifies as libertarian doesn't understand libertarianism. Libertarianism doesn't allow for the concept of fascism. We can't have government oppressing people in any capacity when it comes to the way they live their lives. Allowing an individual to say, hey, you're black, get off my property, is different than allowing a government to say, hey, you're black, get out of my borders.
Yeah.
They're very different leaps. And so, you know, I see where he's going from in his argument, and I understand why he would feel that way. And I definitely understand why there's the struggle with the libertarian ideal that this highlighted for me, and kind of the thought that it brought up for me that I hadn't considered before is, right, like when it's all about individual liberty and freedom and the individual pursuing their life exactly as they see fit, then if every single person only ever ascribed towards their own benefit and goal, then like society itself doesn't move forward. There's no greater good kind of movement. But the reality of it is you and I, and we build relationships. Human nature, libertarianism's biggest weakness is human nature, right?
Well, yeah.
The smaller your government, the more likely the bad parts of human nature come out. It's harder to build a movement when you're solely focused on the individual. A forward movement, right? Like World War II, if we had been a more libertarian country at that point in time, America itself would have been like, man, not our problem.
Yeah, we're not going to get
involved. And then Europe would be a Nazi country.
Which, many, I've read history books. Many people in the government were still arguing for that. I'm sure papers around the world, like in op-eds, for like, yeah, we should just hang out. Like, what's their whole thing? You know? And
the United States has always been somewhat like, hey, just let us do our own thing. Post-World War II, we shifted to being more active in the world at large. Pre-World War II, we really weren't. Even after World War I, we're like, all right, we're done, we're going home.
Right.
And then, again, we started doing our own thing.
Yeah, we really went
a lot of alt-right and conservative people right now are saying, like, no, we shouldn't be involved in what's going on in Ukraine. Like, we need to get out. And the same is true for Israel. Biden's pissing off people on Israel on both ends of it. More conservatives also tend to be religious, and Christian movements in the old days used to be more anti-Jew, but nowadays the Zionist kind of ideal have moved more towards, and nowadays, like the last 50, 60 years, have moved more towards, like, we need to support Israel.
I wonder what
that's where that's coming from.
I mean, I don't know as much as you do, but the little bit I've read on it, there's a reason why many Christians are very supportive of Israel, which to me seems very, what's the word? Kind of manipulative in a way, or like, the end times and all that of like, aren't you know more than me, but isn't the thing that some Jews will be spared and some will be converted at the Holy Land at end times, and doesn't that make Jesus come back, or Jesus will come back, something like that?
Well, Battle of Armageddon happens in Israel, right? But at least for me, the Jewish people are God's chosen people, not the Christians. the Jewish people, and they're meant to be his priesthood, his people on the planet. So,
but isn't there a whole thing about some of them surviving and some of them converting to Christianity, and then that kicks everything off, or something like that? Like, isn't there a big inciting incident?
I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't remember that very specifically.
Well,
but there is a thing of there's a body of people who are raptured and taken away before all of the bad times come. But I'm not a biblical scholar, and I wouldn't quote it correctly, so I won't really go much further than that. The point being, right, is libertarians are like, hey, this isn't our fight. Keep our money here. Protect Americans. Don't protect the rest of the world. Whereas, like, for me, like Ukraine, I look at it from a perspective of like, well, no, our involvement in Ukraine is protecting American interests because the economy is so global.
Yeah.
Like, wheat prices have been hit across the world. Our trading partners, that we want our trading partners to be strong because it's financially beneficial for our trading partners to be strong. And if we are in there kind of backing them up and protecting them, guess what? We're going to get better deals when it comes time to negotiate. Like, hey, by the way, guys, you know, we saved your butt. We want a better rate on this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's, I understand it. I also, you know, in Israel, no matter what I think about the situation, you know, Israel is our ally over there, so it makes sense for us to back our ally, right? Now, is that good? Not always. And so the idea that, like, you know, and we have traded with them and all that kind of stuff, and so like there is this back and forth in Israel, and so we've built that up, like you said, over since 48, or, you know, we were giving them aid for a while. I mean, I know in 67 with the 6-Day War or whatever. So it's one of those things.
I think the United States was the first country to recognize Israel as an independent nation.
Yeah, I think you're right. To me, that's bringing it back to libertarianism. That will kind of be a rough sell. The idea that how do you pull all this back? Because it's been so, you know, this, like you said, now the economy is so global. Like in the libertarian LP.org, they talk about trade and security. It's like, how do you claw that back of like, we've already blown the lid off what, you know.
It's hard. It's almost impossible. I mean, at this point in time, that's one of the hardest sells of the libertarian idea, right? But again, libertarians never going to take complete hold. Still, if you had a libertarian president, they got a lot of power on this, right? Biden has a lot of power. He's getting a ton of flack on what's going on with Israel. Biden's getting a lot of flack about what's going on in Ukraine. And, you know, former President Trump is like, when I was president, this never happened and it wouldn't happen again and I'd fix the war in a day, right? And so the president has a lot of power.
Yeah, I think Trump's got some other things he should probably be worrying about right now. You know, there's a lot of court cases. He should just worry about maybe being in court and getting those taken care of. I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm just saying, when you got that much court in front of you, it's like, maybe I should...
Joe, you've made a judgment on him. Let's just be honest. You may not be putting it out in public right here, right now, but we know what it is. In fact, honestly, you've put it in public on other podcasts.
Yeah. But anyway, my thing is like... my thing is like, I don't know. Everybody has power to do that. I think it would be difficult to claw that back as a libertarian person, to be like, hey, we're not going to...
But I mean, there are a lot of people in the world and the United States who are not happy with our foreign policy and how militaristically we are projected in the world and in the globe. And I don't fault them for that, right? Like, there are times where our military involvement, and you could argue any point in our military involvement, that has actually weakened our foreign stance, not strengthened it like we thought it would, right? Like we talked about last week, you and I privately, the passing of Henry Kissinger and some of the things that he did. And some of his policies have weakened the United States in the world and have grown movements of people who would rather do us harm and who now have more power because of what he had done in our name and what we as a nation had done.
Well, you know,
under his guidance.
Somebody brought it up about Israel. Well, they weren't talking about Israel, Gaza, but they just brought up a good point. They go, you know, like what you were just saying about, think of all the military bases we as the United States have around the world. Like they said, think what would happen if like Germany is like, we're going to put a military base right here, like in off the coast of Maine or whatever. You'd be like, what?
The difference in that though is that, right, like we were largely asked to do it. I mean, it's one of Trump's big hit points on the UN and NATO when he was in office, is like they don't carry their weight.
Right.
They've gotten cushy on the United States providing their protection, and they have their militaries, but like they could always lean on the U.S. because the U.S. would be there. So we fought World War II. Us and our allies won World War II, and then we already had bases there and built stuff up because of that, and then we just kept it there, and our presence has stayed. Our global footprint has shrunk over the last 20 years-ish. As we've asked our allies to provide more of their own defense, like one of the most controversial things in the world, the United States, most Americans aren't even aware of it, but one of the most controversial things that's happened in the world in recent years, from a geopolitical standpoint, was Japan increasing their military spend dramatically, because the United States has basically partnered with them and been like, hey, look, like you're the first line of defense with China, and we can't protect you fully. So like you've got to step up the game. And so I think they're increasing their GDP spend to 2% of GDP, just like all of the other NATO countries have committed to it.
Wow. I didn't know that.
But that's a huge expanse for Japan that has been extremely pacifistic and non-militaristic, and now they're taking a very militaristic stance.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that about Japan, you know. But again, for a libertarian, that's got to be weird of like, how do we claw this back? We've made these promises. And then, you know, like other people pointed out, like, love it or leave it, you know, we have 4-year terms in America, right? So, like, what can you do in 4 years? Someone else takes over and says, I don't care about that. You know, that's not any of my concern. We're getting rid of that. You know, as, you know, other countries are like, what's going on over there? Like, they're changing their mind like, you may get 8. You may, but that's not a guarantee, right? So.
My last trip to Japan with Lisa, we were spending time with her family and was talking with one of her uncles about, like, Japan is very different than the United States, right? Like, they make a decision and they make a commitment, and through various different parties, they just stick with it. And specifically, we were talking about mass transit in like Tokyo and Osaka and other parts of the country where they have these insanely robust rail systems and bus systems. All of the Shinkansen trains, the bullet trains that travel across the country, cut across it. Like, these decisions were made 50 years ago. And though parties have changed who's in control many times over those last 50 years, they stuck to their original commitment from 50 years ago. So these systems are still being built out, and they're still functioning.
Trains still run. It's like we've all made.
And they're still building out, and they're still committed to building out. Right? There's new rail systems and new tunnels. Right, like when we were traveling across the country, there's new rails that haven't even opened yet that are in construction.
And I mean that's the thing here is, again, 4 years. It's like, oh man, that, you know, that's going to be obsolete. And like, you know, we've talked about several issues of this podcast. We're bad at like I don't like the word proactive. We're bad about looking into the future and making a bet for the future. We're really good at like, it's in our face. We have to do something. I mean, we talked about it with climate change.
There's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but I think that one of the biggest parts of it is actually one of the biggest failings of libertarianism, as we were just talking about. I am a firm believer in the supremacy of the individual.
Yeah.
Individual rights and freedoms have to be protected above all else. The difficulty with that, the challenge with that, however, and is that spreads to the whole of society, and the whole of society. The United States is a great example of this pendulum swing back and forth of our political viewpoints. And one party comes in power and they stop doing it. Next party comes in power and they go back to doing anything. And it just kind of swings back and forth with the ebb and flow of society's feelings. I wouldn't change it. But I do wish we could get some leaders in. Some actual leaders. Not politicians, but people that want to lead, that could do some more lasting, sticking ideas.
You know, like the sleepy coat rack we got now? I stole that from someone else. It's just such a good burn on Joe Biden. I listened to some more news. They're progressive, and one of their joke writers came up with that thing of Biden, the sleepy coat rack, and I just think it's probably the best burn that I've heard about. So I stole that. So go watch some more news for other great burns that I won't come up with. But yeah, I mean, wrapping up, it was very informative to find out about libertarianism. And also, like you said, the thing with the individual and this butting heads with the alt-right, which they even realize you aren't, this isn't what we believe, guys. You know, stop doing this, you know. But how, even if you disagree with what the writer said, the idea that the idea that how was I going to put this? So, like, this isn't what we believe, but the idea that, like, I understand where you can come to this conclusion, but you're wrong. You know what I mean? And to me, that was like, oh man, like that's, and then like we just talked about towards the end, how do you claw everything back from, or it can't, you know, you got to pick your battles, obviously, but like, where do you pick your battles? Where do you claw stuff back? Where do you, you know, where's the line of individual liberty and things like that? You know, that was interesting to me. So.
Yeah, and I think this really opens up the conversation that we'll have later on about third parties as a whole too, right?
Yeah, I wrote that down.
How do they function? How do they work within the United States? How did we end up being predominantly driven by two parties? And early on in the founding of the United States, I believe it was George Washington himself that said that if we develop parties, we will move towards a two-party system, and we shouldn't do it. Don't allow it. And right. What have we done?
Yeah, we just did the opposite. So as we leave, Avin, is there anything you want to plug at all? Anything?
You know, as I do all the time, Your Agent Guide, my real estate business side. I do that really just to connect people with talented, professional, and successful real estate agents in their area that can help them. I'm not driving that business to be an individual person's realtor, but to help them find the right one for them. Anywhere in the United States, I can do that. Obviously, I will act as a realtor. I've helped a couple of different friends in real estate transactions, but that's not my actual ambition and drive in that.
Yeah, I mean, I still get, I don't know if you're doing videos as well, but I'm still getting updates on Facebook about like, you know, facts, like housing facts.
And I like to, you know, if you follow me on Instagram, Your Agent Guide, or on Facebook, I do publish 5 days a week, 6 days a week, just kind of current updates on where the general real estate market is. Just quick little posts about that. And so anyone that's interested in that information, just feel free to check it out.
Yeah, my wife and I, like, I've been reading those, like, oh, well, you know, like we've outgrown our domicile, so we're looking, but then obviously with the, whatever, that's another podcast, golden handcuffs and stuff. I think for me, the only thing I'll plug is the other podcast I'm on, Gaming with Grief. Avin's on there every once in a while. I'm finishing up a game for review now. It'll be out Sunday afternoon on the DL, and then the video will come out Monday. We actually have seen an uptick in viewership and stuff. If you like what you were seeing, if you're either watching us on like Spotify or YouTube, like, subscribe, share it with your friends and family. I try to get good about promoting stuff, but I'm terrible at promoting stuff at the same time. So like when I remember, I need to do a reminder of that. And we're trying out a new format. Obviously, we want to be in person and do this, but I got rid of the overlay because I wanted you to see all of us all the time instead of a tiny window of us. So this, I think, will work better. If you're
watching the show, if you've come back and watched old ones, we would love your feedback on, like, what do you prefer? What do you like? What interferes with it?
And then, if you want to write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com and let us know what episode, you know, you watched and what you think. You know, I'm a liberal hippie. Avin's a conservative tool. I don't know the put down for conservatives. I've only heard the other one that isn't really conservatives. It's just people that follow Trump. I haven't actually heard the put down of like conservative whatever. I've heard the liberal hippie. I've heard the
fascist.
Oh yeah, that's probably it. You're probably right.
Yeah.
So I think somebody did say that to me the other day. I was driving with a coworker. We do this every month. It was probably 2 months ago, and he was complaining about something, and he said, you know, these liberal a-holes, and I said, I'm liberal, and he said, what? Like, it shocked him that I would be, and then I told him, and he's like, oh, well, you don't seem like you're liberal, and I was like, I don't know what that means.
It's because you guys talk and know each other, and that's not a part of your identity to each other. Yeah,
at the time he was a new employee. I know him a little bit better now, but yeah, it was funny when he said, well, you don't seem liberal, and I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Right? Yeah. Like meeting someone being like, you don't seem gay. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, there was to bring it back to video games, there was a game called Rogue Legacy. And in Rogue Legacy, it was a roguelike. So if you died, you had to start over, and you tried to keep the stuff from each run to get better and better and buy upgrades and stuff like that. But you would always start over. And one of the things you did, you had like perks and stuff. So you could, if you were colorblind, it like monochromatic the world, so you couldn't see color. It was like stuff like that, and you get extra bonuses and things like that. And then one of the things was homosexual, and if you clicked on it, nothing changed. and there was comments on a message board of like, this isn't changing anything, and the developer's like, that's the point. Like, it doesn't change it. Like, it changes nothing. But I thought that was a good way to be like, it changes nothing. You know, like, it changes absolutely nothing. So Avin, it's good to talk to you again as always. And I don't know what we're going to talk about next month. We had a couple things, but I mean, I think it's always a month. We record these in advance. We try to stay with current events, but sometimes like topics like this, we just keep nibbling around the edges, and we thought we'd actually do an episode about it. So I guess next month it'll be a surprise because either something will come out of the blue. Unfortunately, it was with Israel and Palestine last time. Hopefully it'll be something better next time. But yeah, I mean, we got some episodes written down. So yeah, just like, subscribe, that kind of stuff. Again, share it with friends and family. Thank you for listening to us ramble for about an hour. And we will talk to everybody next month.